Millbrook, Pennsylvania, 1971. The telegram arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, delivered by a solemn-faced young man who couldn't meet Martha Wilson's eyes when she opened the door. It was a message every military family dreaded, the official notification that her son, Private First Class Thomas Wilson, had been killed in action in Vietnam. "We regret to inform you." The words blurred as tears filled Martha's eyes. She clutched the doorframe for support, her other hand pressed against her mouth to stifle a scream that threatened to tear her apart from inside. Thomas had been just 19 when he was drafted, a quiet boy who loved fishing in Sinclair Creek and working on cars with his father. He hadn't wanted to go to war, but he'd accepted his duty without complaint, the way he approached everything in life, with a steadfast determination and quiet dignity. The details in the telegram were sparse. Thomas had been part of a reconnaissance patrol in Quang Tri Province near the DMZ when his unit was ambushed. In the ensuing firefight, Thomas was reported missing and presumed killed. Due to the intense enemy activity in the area, recovery of his remains had not been possible. Martha's husband, Frank, was at the steel mill when the telegram came. It fell to her to phone him at work, her voice barely functioning as she told the secretary it was an emergency. By the time Frank arrived home, their daughter Ellen had returned from high school, and the two women were holding each other in the living room, the telegram lying on the coffee table like a malevolent presence. "No body," Frank kept saying after reading the telegram, his weathered face ashen. "How can they be sure? If there's no body, how can they be sure?" But the follow-up visit from the military notification, officers left little room for hope. Thomas's unit had been pinned down in heavy jungle. Two men reported seeing Thomas take multiple hits before falling into a ravine. When his squad was forced to retreat under intense fire, he wasn't among them. A subsequent search once the area was secured found blood trails leading to the ravine, but no sign of Thomas. If this story has you leaning in, help us keep uncovering forgotten cases. Hit that like button now, and subscribe to Gone Cold so you never miss the next chapter in history's most haunting mysteries. Not unusual in the dense jungle terrain where the enemy often removed the bodies of American soldiers. The Wilsons held memorial service at Millbrook Methodist Church, where Thomas had been baptized and confirmed. A flag-draped empty casket stood at the front of the church, a vessel for their grief rather than their son's remains. Life in the Wilson household fractured along fault lines of sorrow. Frank threw himself into work, taking double shifts at the mill. Martha boxed up Thomas's belongings, but couldn't bear to remove the photos of him from the walls. Ellen, 17 and suddenly rudderless without her big brother's steady presence, retreated into books and solitary walks along Sinclair Creek. Months passed. The initial shock of grief gave way to a persistent ache that flared into sharp pain at unexpected moments. When Frank found Thomas's fishing tackle in the garage, when Martha absent-mindedly set the dinner table for 4 instead of 3, when Ellen received her college acceptance letter with no brother to share the news. As America's involvement in Vietnam wound down and other soldiers returned home, the Wilsons watched neighboring families reunite while their own remained permanently broken. Their comfort came in small measures. Thomas's name would be added to the war memorial being planned in Washington, D.C. His Purple Heart and Bronze Star with Valor arrived in a polished wooden box. His high school established a small scholarship in his memory, and life, as it inevitably does, continued. Frank and Martha grew older. Ellen graduated college, married, had children of her own. Thomas's memories softened around the edges, transforming from an open wound to a tender scar, always present but no longer debilitating. What the Wilson family didn't know, couldn't know, was that the story of Thomas Wilson was far from over. It was merely paused, waiting for an unlikely discovery half a world away and half a century later. Quang Tri Province, Vietnam, 2021. Dr. Lin Nguyen wiped sweat from her brow as she carefully navigated the steep jungle path. At 36, the geologist has spent nearly a decade mapping the extensive cave systems of central Vietnam, documenting their unique formations and advocating for their preservation. Today's expedition targeted a previously unexplored cavern identified by satellite imaging, potentially an important addition to her survey of the region. How much farther? Dr. Nguyen, called Min, her research assistant, who was struggling with a heavy equipment pack on the narrow trail. "The entrance should be just beyond that limestone outcropping," Lynn replied, pointing ahead. "According to the coordinates, anyway." The jungle had reclaimed much of this area since the war, covering old scars with lush vegetation. Occasionally, Lynn's team encountered remnants of that violent era: shell casings, deteriorated equipment, even unexploded ordnance that required careful reporting to disposal experts. The land remembered what many people preferred to forget. After another 20 minutes of difficult hiking, they reached the cave entrance, a narrow vertical fissure in a limestone cliff face, partially obscured by vines and underbrush. Initial readings indicated good oxygen levels and no dangerous gas concentrations, so they prepared to enter. Standard protocol. Lynn reminded her team of 4, stay together, document everything, touch nothing historical if found. The cave opened up after the narrow entrance passage, revealing a breathtaking chamber with stalactites hanging like stone icicles from the ceiling. Their headlamps cut through the darkness, illuminating rock formations shaped by millennia of patient water droplets. Lynn immediately began photographing and taking samples, directing her team to different sections of the cavern. "Dr. Nguyen," Min called from a smaller side chamber, "I think you should see this." Lynn made her way to where Min stood, his headlamp focused on a disturbed area of the cave floor. Unlike the natural formation surrounding it, this section showed clear signs of human activity. A crude stone circle that had once contained a fire, now cold for decades. Nearby lay the deteriorated remains of what appeared to be a makeshift sleeping area. "Someone lived here," Min said quietly. "During the war, maybe?" Lynn nodded, carefully examining the area without disturbing it. "Look for any identifying items. If this was a military position, we need to document it properly." They searched methodically, finding a few rusted cans, rotted fabric, and a plastic water container of American manufacture. But it was team member Dow who made the significant discovery, carefully brushing aside sediment from a small metallic object half buried near the fire circle. "Dog tags," he said, holding up the tarnished metal identification tags on their deteriorated chain. Despite 50 years of exposure to the elements, the stamped information remained legible. "Wilson, Thomas J. US 51438729. O positive. Methodist. American," Lynn said, carefully photographing the tags in situ before Dow placed them in a specimen bag. "We'll need to report this to the authorities and the Joint POW-MIA Accounting Command." As they continued their survey, the story of the cave revealed itself in small, poignant details. A wall of the chamber marked with crude tally marks counting days, the remains of bamboo splint, suggesting an injury, a carefully constructed water collection system that would have captured the cave's natural seepage. "He survived the ambush," Lynn said quietly, piecing together the evidence before them. "Made it to this cave, treated his wounds, lived here for some time, but never made a home," Min finished, looking around the lonely refuge that had been someone's last shelter. Later that evening, as her team cataloged the day's discoveries at their field camp, Lynn filed her preliminary report, attaching photographs of the dog tags. Within hours, the information began its journey through official channels, from Vietnamese authorities to American diplomatic offices, from there to military departments specializing in MIA cases, and finally to a modest home in Pennsylvania, where an elderly woman had long ago accepted that her son's body would never be recovered. Martha Wilson, now 91 years old, was about to receive news that would reopen a chapter of her life she had believed was forever closed. Millbrook, Pennsylvania, 2021. Ellen Wilson Schaefer was helping her mother into her favorite armchair when the phone rang. At 67, Ellen had moved back into her childhood home 5 years earlier after her father's death, caring for Martha as the older woman's health gradually declined. Despite her age and increasing frailty, Martha's mind remained sharp, her daily routines punctuated by reading, watching her favorite game shows, and reminiscing about the past. "Schaefer residence," Ellen answered, balancing the phone against her shoulder as she adjusted her mother's blanket. "Mrs. Ellen Wilson Schaefer?" The male voice was formal, professional. "This is Captain James Merrick from the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency. I'm calling regarding your brother, Private First Class Thomas Wilson. Ellen froze, her hand still on the blanket. In the decade since Thomas's death, there had been no official communications about him beyond the initial notifications in 1971. Yes, she managed, her voice suddenly thin. Ma'am, we received information from Vietnam that may pertain to your brother's case. I'd like to schedule a time to meet with you and any other family members in person. This is standard protocol for new developments. New developments? Ellen repeated, struggling to process the concept. What new developments could possibly exist after 50 years? My mother is here with me. She's 91. Is this something that can't be discussed over the phone? There was a slight pause. We prefer to handle these matters in person, ma'am. But I can tell you that a research team in Vietnam has recovered what appear to be your brother's identification tags in a cave system in Quang Tri Province. We're in the process of authenticating them and conducting further investigation of the site. Ellen's legs gave way, and she sank onto the arm of her mother's chair. His dog tags? After all this time? Ellen, Martha looked up, concern etching deeper lines into her already wrinkled face. What is it? Who's on the phone? Captain Merrick continued speaking, explaining procedures and timelines, but Ellen was only half listening, her mind racing with implications. She managed to schedule a meeting for the following day before hanging up, then turned to her mother with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. Mom, she said gently, taking Martha's thin fingers in her own. That was someone from the military. They found something of Tommy's in Vietnam. His dog tags. Martha's faded blue eyes widened, a spark of something long dormant flaring to life within them. His tags? Where? How? Ellen explained what little she knew. The cave, the research team, the pending authentication. As she spoke, she watched her mother's expression transform, decades of resignation giving way to painful hope. The cave, Martha said slowly. He was alive in that cave. It wasn't a question, but a statement of realization. He didn't die in the ambush like they told us. We don't know that for certain, Mom, Ellen cautioned, though the same thought had struck her immediately. Let's wait to hear what the captain has to say tomorrow. But waiting had never been more difficult. That night, neither woman slept much. Ellen found her mother at the kitchen table at 3 a.m., a photo album open before her. Thomas's high school graduation picture, his basic training portrait, the last family photo taken before his deployment, the images of a perpetually young man who had been gone longer than he had been alive. I used to have dreams, Martha confessed in the quiet kitchen, her finger tracing the outline of her son's face. For years after we got the telegram, dreams where he came walking up the driveway, saying there had been a mistake. Her voice quavered. They felt so real that waking up was like losing him all over again. Ellen nodded, remembering her own version of those dreams, her brother appearing in her college dorm room, at her wedding, in the hospital when her children were born. The phantom presence of someone who should have been there. Captain Merrick arrived promptly at 10 a.m. the next morning, in full dress uniform, accompanied by a civilian woman. He introduced as Dr. Patricia Hayes, a forensic anthropologist with the DPA. They sat in the Wilsons' living room, beneath the same walls where Thomas's photos had hung for 50 years. First, I want to thank you both for meeting with us, the captain began, and to assure you that we're approaching this development with all the care and thoroughness it deserves. Dr. Hayes opened a laptop, showing them photographs of the cave and the recovered items. Based on our preliminary analysis, these are indeed Thomas's identification tags, she explained. The serial number matches his military records. We're conducting metallurgical testing to confirm the age and authenticity, but all indications suggest they are genuine. What else did they find? Martha asked, her voice stronger than Ellen had heard it in years. Was his body there? The captain and Dr. Hayes exchanged a glance. No human remains have been recovered at this time, Dr. Hayes said carefully, but the evidence suggests someone occupied that cave for an extended period, possibly months. There were tally marks on the wall, a makeshift bed area, signs of food preparation. So he survived, Martha said, tears welling in her eyes. My boy survived the ambush. It appears so, Mrs. Wilson, Captain Merrick confirmed. We're preparing a more thorough excavation and survey of the cave and surrounding area. If there are remains to be found, we'll find them. Ellen felt a complex wave of emotions, grief refreshed after decades of careful management, anger at the military for the mistaken death notification, and a strange, unexpected relief that Thomas hadn't died in the violent chaos of an ambush but had lived longer, perhaps finding some measure of peace in his cave refuge. We'd like to collect DNA samples from both of you, Dr. Hayes continued, in case we do recover remains that might be identified through familial matching. Martha nodded immediately. Anything you need, anything that helps bring him home. As the meeting concluded, Captain Merrick presented them with photographs of the dog tags in the cave, along with a formal letter acknowledging the discovery and outlining next steps. Before leaving, he paused at the door. Mrs. Wilson, we never close a case until we bring our soldiers home, even after 50 years. After the officials departed, Ellen and Martha sat in silence for a long time. The photographs spread before them, tangible evidence that Thomas's story had not ended in 1971, as they believed. The cave had protected his final secret for half a century, preserving this one last connection to a lost son and brother. He was alone, Martha finally said, her voice breaking. All that time, while we had memorial service and tried to move on with our lives, he was alone in that cave. Ellen put her arm around her mother's thin shoulders. But now we know, and soon we'll bring him home. Outside, spring rain began to fall on Millbrook, washing the world clean as two women began the process of revisiting a grief they thought was long settled. Somewhere in the midst of memory, Thomas Wilson was no longer frozen as the 19-year-old who marched off to war, but had become something more complex, a survivor whose final chapter was only now being written. Quang Tri Province, Vietnam, 2022. The international team worked methodically in the cave, now illuminated by professional lighting equipment. American and Vietnamese archaeologists cataloged every artifact, photographing and mapping the site with precision. Dr. Ling Nguyen remained as a local liaison, her geological expertise proving valuable as they extended their search to smaller adjoining caverns. In Philadelphia, Ellen Wilson Schaefer's phone chimed with an incoming video call from Captain Merrick. These weekly updates have become a fiction in the lives of the Wilson women over the 4 months since the discovery of Thomas's dog tags. They found something significant, Ellen told her mother as they huddled around the tablet screen in Martha's bedroom, where the elderly woman now spent most of her days, her health declining despite her renewed determination to live long enough to see her son brought home. Captain Merrick's face appeared, looking tired but animated. Mrs. Wilson, Mrs. Schaefer, good morning. I'm calling from the field site. We've made several important discoveries I wanted to share with you personally. The camera panned to show a table covered with carefully arranged artifacts, a rusted military-issue knife, the degraded remains of a first aid kit, and most remarkably, a small, water-damaged notebook. We found this hidden in a small crevice in the cave wall, Merrick explained, as Dr. Hayes carefully opened the notebook to reveal pages of faded handwriting. It appears to be a journal your son kept during his time in the cave. Our preservation team is working to stabilize and digitize the contents, but I wanted you to know immediately. Martha's hand trembled as she reached toward the screen, as if she could touch the notebook across the thousands of miles separating her from her son's last words. Can you read any of it? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Some entries are still legible, Dr. Hayes said, gently turning to a page that had been photographed and enhanced. This one is dated April 17th, 1971, about 2 months after the ambush. She read aloud. Fever finally broke today. Legs still infected, but draining better after using the last of the sulfa powder. Counted 63 days since the firefight. Keep thinking about Mom's birthday next month. She always said all she wanted was for all of us to be around the table together. Sorry, Mom. Silent tears streamed down Martha's weathered face. Ellen held her mother's hand tightly, her own vision blurring. There's more, Captain Merrick said gently. We've also located human remains in a small side chamber, approximately 30 meters from the main cave area. Initial examination suggests they're consistent with a young adult male. were proceeding with recovery and identification protocols. The remains were found wrapped in the deteriorated fabric of what appeared to be a military jacket, suggesting Thomas had prepared for his own death as his condition worsened. Near the remains, a team discovered a crude carving in the limestone wall, the initials TW, and beneath them PA 4962, which they believe represented Pennsylvania and the years of his birth and death. He knew he wasn't going to make it, Ellen said softly after the call ended. He marked his own grave. Martha nodded, a strange calm settling over her features. He was always so thoughtful that way, even as a boy. The following weeks brought more revelations as the journal was carefully preserved and transcribed. Thomas had survived the initial ambush with a severe leg wound, dragging himself to the jungle for nearly 2 days before finding the cave. He had treated his injuries with supplies from a medical kit he'd been carrying as his unit's designated first aid person, but without proper antibiotics, infection had set in. The journal documented his attempts to signal for help, his forays out of the cave when his strength permitted, and eventually his acceptance that rescue would not come. The entries became more philosophical as the condition deteriorated, reflecting on his short life and the family he missed desperately. The final entry, dated June 18, 1971, nearly 5 months after he was reported killed, read simply, "Fever back. Too weak to find more water. Thinking of home. I hope they know I tried." In their modest house in Millbrook, Martha read these transcripts over and over, sometimes aloud to Ellen, sometimes silently to herself. They were painful but precious, the last gift from a son she had mourned for 50 years without ever knowing his final thoughts. "He wasn't alone," she told Ellen one evening. "That's what I keep thinking. All these years, I've tortured myself imagining him dying alone in that jungle during the ambush. But he had time to think, to remember, to make peace." Ellen nodded, understanding her mother's need to find comfort in these painful details. He had the cave protecting him, a quiet place. Martha smiled faintly, like when he was little and would hide in the closet with his books when things got too noisy. He always did need his quiet places. Millbrook, Pennsylvania, 2023. The hearse moved slowly through town, led by police motorcycles with flashing lights, and followed by a procession of vehicles stretching for nearly a mile. Along the route, residents of Millbrook stood in silent respect, many holding American flags. Some were old enough to remember Thomas Wilson, the quiet boy who had gone to Vietnam and never returned. Most knew him only as a name on the town's war memorial, a piece of local history suddenly made vivid and immediate. At the Wilson house, now adorned with yellow ribbons and American flags, Ellen helped her mother down the porch steps toward the waiting car. Martha Wilson, now 93 and using a wheelchair, insisted on wearing her best dress and a string of pearls Frank had given her on their 40th anniversary. On her lap lay a framed photograph of Thomas in his uniform. "It's a good turnout," Ellen said softly as they settled into the funeral home's limousine. "The whole town's come out for Tommy." Martha nodded, her eyes fixed on the hearse ahead that carried her son's flag-draped casket. After extensive DNA testing had confirmed the remains found in the Vietnamese cave were indeed those of Private First Class Thomas Wilson, the military had arranged for their return with full honors. The identification had come just in time. Martha's health had declined rapidly in recent months, her doctor quietly telling Ellen that her mother was holding on through sheer determination to see her son properly laid to rest. At Millbrook Cemetery, a military honor guard waited at the graveside. The plot beside Frank Wilson's grave had remained empty for 52 years, reserved for Martha but about to receive her son instead. Martha had been clear she would make other arrangements for herself. This spot had always been meant for Thomas. The service was brief but powerful. Captain Merrick, who had overseen the case from discovery to repatriation, spoke about the commitment to leave no soldier behind, even decades later. A Vietnam veteran who had served in Thomas's unit shared memories of the young medic who had treated his minor injuries just days before the ambush. Then it was Martha's turn. Ellen had worried her mother wouldn't have the strength, but Martha had insisted on speaking, helped to the podium by her grandson, Ellen's son, named Thomas after the uncle he had never met, Martha unfolded a piece of paper with shaking hands. 52 years ago, she began, her voice thin but steady, I received a telegram telling me my son had died in a distant jungle. Today, I finally get to welcome him home. She paused, gathering herself. The military told us he was presumed killed in action, but now we know Thomas survived that ambush. He lived for months, alone in that cave, trying to heal, trying to find his way back to us. She looked up from her notes, scanning the gathered faces. Some might find that knowledge more painful, thinking of him alone, injured, finally succumbing to his wounds. But I find comfort in it. My son wasn't taken instantly in the chaos of battle. He had time to reflect, to write in his journal, to think of home. And most importantly, he never gave up. His last words tell us he tried until the very end to come back to us. Martha folded her paper, no longer needing it. Today, we fulfill the promise our country makes to its fallen soldiers, that they will be brought home. And I fulfill my promise as a mother to wait for him, no matter how long it takes. As the honor guard folded the flag from Thomas's casket with precise, ceremonial movements, a light snow began to fall, unusual for early April, but creating a hushed, reverent atmosphere. The flag was presented to Martha, who clutched it against a framed photograph still on her lap, completing a circle of remembrance. Later, after the mourners had departed and only family remained, Ellen stood with her arm around her mother's shoulders as they took a final moment at the fresh grave. "You can rest now, Mom," she said gently. "He's home." Martha nodded, her eyes on the temporary marker that would soon be replaced with a permanent headstone reading PFC Thomas J. Wilson, 1949 to 1971, returned home 2023. "When my time comes," she said quietly, "I want some of my ashes placed in that cave in Vietnam. Part of me here with Frank and Thomas, but part of me there where my son spent his final days. So he'll know he wasn't alone, even then." 3 weeks later, Martha Wilson passed away peacefully in her sleep. The local newspaper's obituary noted that she had lived just long enough to welcome her long-lost son home, as if her life's final purpose had been fulfilled. 1 year after that, Ellen Wilson Schaefer made the long journey to Vietnam, carrying a small urn containing a portion of her mother's ashes. Dr. Lin Nguyen, who had made the initial discovery that changed everything, accompanied her to the remote cave that had sheltered Thomas in his final months. In a small private ceremony, Ellen placed the urn in a natural niche in the cave wall, near where Thomas had carved his initials. She placed her hand on the cool limestone, feeling a connection across time and space to her brother's last days. "Mom's here now, Tommy," she said softly into the quiet darkness. "You were never alone." Outside, the Vietnamese jungle had already begun to reclaim the path to the cave, nature erasing the signs of human passage, just as it had 50 years earlier. But inside, protected from time and elements, a mother and son were finally reunited. Their story a testament to the enduring bonds of family that neither war nor time could sever. In Millbrook, Pennsylvania, their names now appear together on a shared headstone. Thomas, who gave his life for his country, and Martha, who never stopped waiting for him to come home. After hearing what happened in that cave, do you think Thomas Wilson could have been found sooner, or was his fate sealed the day of the ambush? Like this video, subscribe to Gone Cold, and share your theory in the comments. I'll be reading every one of them, because your ideas help keep these stories alive.